The Velanthe warship emerged from hyperspace like a metal mountain breaking through clouds. It was followed by 12 more, each one larger than the last. The flagship alone stretched 40 kilometers from bow to stern, covered in weapons that could turn entire continents to glass. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the observation deck and watched the blue-green world below with satisfaction. This was New Cascadia, humanity's largest colony world. Today, the Velanthe hegemony would meet these newcomers and show them their place in the galaxy. For 12,000 years, the hegemony had ruled their sector of space. They had conquered 63 species. Some had joined willingly. Others had resisted and learned the cost of resistance. The Velanthe were not cruel by nature, but they believed in order. They believed that strength was the foundation of peace, and no species in known space had ever matched their strength. Kethvar's scales shifted from deep blue to confident purple as the shuttle descended toward the planet's capital city. The Velanthe were tall beings, nearly 3 meters in height, with 4 arms and skin that changed color with their emotions. They had evolved as predators on a harsh world, and they had never forgotten it. The human delegation waited at the landing platform. Kethvar studied them as the shuttle doors opened. They were small creatures, barely reaching his chest. Soft skin with no scales or armor, only 2 arms. They looked fragile, like something that might break if handled roughly. A woman stepped forward. She wore a simple gray uniform with metal pins on her collar. Her hair was dark, cut short, and her eyes held a calm that Kethvar found slightly unsettling. "Ambassador Kethvar," she said, her voice steady. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen, military liaison for the United Earth Coalition. Welcome to New Cascadia." Kethvar performed the traditional Velanthe greeting, spreading all 4 arms wide. "Admiral Chen, the hegemony is pleased to make formal contact with humanity. We come in peace, but also in strength. It is our way to be honest about what we are." Chen smiled. It was a small expression hard to read. "We appreciate honesty, Ambassador. Please come inside. We have prepared a reception." The reception hall was pleasant but modest. Kethvar noticed that the humans had not tried to impress them with grand architecture or displays of wealth. Either they had none to display, or they did not feel the need. He assumed it was the former. During the meal, Kethvar decided it was time to establish the proper dynamic. He gestured to one of his aides, who activated a holographic projector. The air above the dining table filled with images of the Velanthe fleet. "Admiral Chen," Kethvar said, "I believe in clear communication between our peoples. Let me show you what the hegemony represents." The hologram zoomed in on the flagship. Statistics appeared beside it: length, mass crew complement, weapons systems. "This is the pride of Velanthe," Kethvar announced. "It carries enough firepower to destroy this planet's surface in approximately 4 hours. We have 300 ships of this class." He watched the humans for their reaction. He expected fear or at least respect. Instead, he saw Admiral Chen glance at the young officer beside her. The young woman, Commander Tanaka, according to her name tag, was pressing her lips together tightly. Her shoulders were shaking slightly. She was trying not to laugh. Kethvar's scales flickered to orange, a sign of confusion. "Is something amusing, Commander?" Tanaka's face turned red. She looked at Admiral Chen, who gave her a small nod. "I apologize, Ambassador," Tanaka said. "I meant no disrespect, it's just. The design reminds me of something from our history. Please continue." Kethvar was not satisfied, but he continued. The hologram showed weapon demonstrations. A Velanthe dreadnought firing its main cannon at a test moon, cracking it into pieces. A fleet bombardment reducing a planetary surface to molten rock. The complete destruction of a space station that had belonged to a species that had refused hegemony rule. "We do not enjoy destruction," Kethvar said, "but we believe that peace requires strength. When others see what we can do, they choose peace. This is the Velanthe way." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. I understand, Ambassador. You believe in deterrence through overwhelming force. Yes, exactly. Kethvar felt pleased that she understood. Now, perhaps you would like to show us humanity's military capabilities. We are curious about your weapons. The humans exchanged looks again. Chen seemed to consider the question carefully. Ambassador, she said, I'm not sure that would be appropriate for a diplomatic meeting. Our military technology is different from yours. I wouldn't want to create any misunderstandings. Kethvar's scales shifted to a skeptical yellow. Different how? Just different design philosophies, Chen said. We've moved in another direction. It might be difficult to compare. Now Kethvar understood. The humans were embarrassed. They had no weapons worth showing. Their tiny ships, their soft bodies, their modest buildings, it all made sense now. Humanity was a young species, barely reaching into space. They had nothing that could match the hegemony. He felt something close to pity. I see. Well, there is no shame in being young. Every species must start somewhere. The hegemony can offer protection to those who join us willingly. Perhaps we can discuss terms that would benefit both our peoples. Chen's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. That's very generous, Ambassador. We'll certainly consider all options. The rest of the reception passed pleasantly. Kethvar found the humans agreeable, if unremarkable. They asked many questions about Velanthi culture and history. They seemed genuinely interested, which pleased him. As his shuttle lifted off from New Cascadia, Kethvar composed his report to the High Council. The words came easily. Humanity poses no military threat to the hegemony. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. Their population is small, spread across fewer than 50 colony worlds. They are polite and seem open to negotiation. I recommend we proceed with standard integration protocols. With proper guidance, they could become productive members of the hegemony within 2 generations. He sent the report and watched the human world shrink below him. Such a small species, such a short history. They had much to learn about how the galaxy worked. Kethvar did not notice Commander Tanaka watching his shuttle from a window in the reception hall. He did not see her finally release the laugh she had been holding. He did not hear her say to Admiral Chen, "Did you see the size of those guns? They actually think bigger is better. It's like looking at our ancestors." And he certainly did not see Chen's response, a slight smile and a shake of her head. "They'll learn," she said quietly. "One way or another they'll learn." 3 months after the diplomatic reception on New Cascadia, a Velanthi patrol moved through the outer reaches of the hegemony's claimed territory. Sub-Admiral Rithkai commanded 15 warships, each one bristling with weapons. His mission was simple: patrol the border, remind everyone who controlled this space, and deal with any problems that arose. The problem appeared on his sensors as 12 small contacts moving through an asteroid field rich in rare minerals. The field was in disputed space, claimed by both the hegemony and the human coalition. Rithkai had clear orders about such situations. "Identify those ships," he commanded. His sensor officer worked quickly. Human vessels, Sub-Admiral, 8 cargo haulers and 4 escort frigates. They appear to be mining operations. Rithkai's scales turned satisfied orange. This was perfect. A chance to remind the humans of their place. According to hegemony law, all resources in disputed territory belong to whoever could hold them. And 15 warships could certainly hold this asteroid field against 4 tiny frigates. "Open communications," Rithkai ordered. The main screen flickered and a human face appeared. The man was older, with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes. He wore a simple captain's jacket, faded from years of use. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the cargo vessel Steady Hand," the human said. "How can I help you?" "Human vessel, you are operating in Velanthi territory," Rithkai announced. "You will surrender your cargo and submit to inspection under hegemony law. Your ships will be escorted to our nearest station for processing. Webb scratched his beard thoughtfully. Well now, Sub-Admiral, I'm not sure I can do that. See, according to our charts, this field is in disputed space. We've got as much right to be here as anyone. You have no rights here, except those we choose to give you. Rithkai felt his patience thinning. This is not a negotiation. Comply or face consequences. I hear you, Webb said calmly. But I've got contracts to fulfill and crew who need their pay. I'm going to have to respectfully decline. No offense intended. Rithkai could not believe what he was hearing. 4 small frigates were refusing to yield to 15 warships. The humans were either brave or stupid, probably both. Very well, he said. You have chosen consequences. He cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. Fire a warning shot. Low-power plasma burst to the lead frigate's engines. Disable them but do not destroy. I want these humans alive to tell others what happens when you defy the hegemony. The weapons officer complied. A brilliant lance of blue-white energy shot across the void toward the human escort frigate. And then something strange happened. The plasma burst hit something invisible about 100 meters from the human ship. It splashed outward like water hitting glass, spreading across a surface that Rithkai could not see. The energy dissipated harmlessly. The frigate was completely untouched. Report, Rithkai demanded. What was that? The sensor officer was staring at her console in confusion. I don't know, Sub-Admiral, there's nothing there. No shields, no barriers, nothing. Our sensors show empty space. That's impossible, we all saw. Sub-Admiral, I'm telling you what the instruments say. There is nothing protecting those ships. Rithkai's scales shifted to angry red. All ships full barrage. Target all human vessels. Show them what Velanthy firepower means. 15 warships opened fire simultaneously. Plasma cannons, kinetic accelerators, missile batteries, everything they had poured toward the small human convoy. The space between the fleets became a storm of destructive energy, enough firepower to crack the surface of a small moon. When the light faded, the human ships were exactly where they had been. Not one had moved. Not one showed any damage. They floated peacefully among the asteroids, completely unharmed. Rithkai stared at the screen, his scales cycling through colors as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. That was impossible. Nothing could survive that barrage. Nothing. One of the human frigates began to rotate slowly, turning to face the Velanthy fleet directly. It was a tiny thing, barely 200 meters long, a fraction of the size of his smallest ship. Captain Webb's voice came through the speakers again. He sounded almost sad. Sub-Admiral, I really wish you hadn't done that. I understand you were doing your job and I don't hold it against you personally, but my orders are clear. If fired upon, I'm authorized to give one demonstration, just so we all understand each other. Demonstration, Rithkai managed. What demonstration? Watch your flagship's forward weapons array, Webb said. And please tell your crew not to panic. Nobody's going to get hurt. Rithkai spun toward the viewport, staring at his own ship's massive forward section. The weapons array there contained enough firepower to glass a continent. It was the pride of his vessel, the symbol of Velanthy power. He saw no beam, no missile, no flash of light, nothing at all. But suddenly, the weapons array was simply gone. Not destroyed, not melted or blown apart, just absent. Where tons of metal and machinery had existed a moment before, there was now smooth hull as if the weapons had never been installed. The cut was perfect, impossibly clean. The surrounding systems were undamaged. Life support continued. Artificial gravity remained stable. The crew quarters 20 meters from the former array were untouched. The bridge was silent. Every Velanthy stared at their consoles, at the viewport, at each other. Nobody could speak. That was our smallest weapon, Webb said quietly. Fired at its lowest setting from a frigate. Sub-Admiral, I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm trying to prevent a terrible mistake. The hegemony has never met a species like humanity before. We don't want war. We really, truly don't. But if you force one on us, it won't be the war you're expecting." Rithkai found his voice. What do you want?" "I want you to go home and tell your leaders what happened here today. Tell them everything. Tell them we didn't destroy your ship when we could have. Tell them we just want to be left alone to mine our asteroids and live our lives. And tell them that if they want to talk instead of fight, we're ready to listen." Webb paused. "Can you do that for me, Sub-Admiral?" Rithkai's scales had gone pale gray, the Valanthy color of fear. "Yes," he whispered, "I can do that." "Good, then I think we're done here. Safe travels, Sub-Admiral. I hope the next time we meet it's under better circumstances." The human convoy resumed its work, haulers moving among the asteroids as if nothing had happened. Rithkai ordered his fleet to withdraw. Nobody argued. Nobody suggested staying to fight. As his ships limped toward home, Rithkai composed his own report. His hands trembled as he dictated. The words felt inadequate, but he tried anyway. "We engaged 12 human vessels. We fired everything we had. They were not scratched. Then they fired once, just once, and removed our main weapons array without harming anything else. I do not understand their technology. I do not know the limits of their power. I only know that the hegemony has never faced anything like this. May the ancestors guide us, because I do not think our weapons will." He sent the report and sat in darkness, watching the stars. Somewhere behind him, Captain Marcus Webb returned to his work, hauling ore and thinking about dinner. Just another day on the frontier. Rithkai suspected his own life would never be the same. The High Council chamber had stood for 9,000 years. Its walls were carved from the bones of the great sky beasts that once ruled Valantha's skis. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. For generations beyond counting, this room had witnessed the decisions that shaped the hegemony's destiny. Today it witnessed fear. Kethvar stood before the 13 members of the High Council, presenting the evidence that had arrived from Sub-Admiral Rithkai's patrol. The holographic display showed the battle, if it could be called a battle, in perfect detail. 15 warships firing everything they had, human vessels floating untouched, and then the impossible moment when the flagship's weapons simply ceased to exist. When the recording ended, silence filled the chamber. War Master Thelvok was the first to speak. He was old for a Valanthy, his scales faded to pale blue, but his voice still carried the strength of a warrior. "This is clearly a trick, some kind of sensor manipulation. The humans cannot possibly have weapons that advanced." "With respect, War Master," Kethvar replied. "Rithkai's crew inspected the damage personally. The weapons array is gone. The molecular structure of the surrounding hull shows no signs of heat damage, radiation, or conventional force. They do not understand what happened. Neither do our scientists." "Then we strike now." Thelvok slammed 2 of his fists against his chair. "Before they can prepare, we mobilize every fleet, every weapon, every soldier. We overwhelm them with numbers. No technology can stand against the full might of the hegemony." "Can it not?" The voice was quiet, but it silenced the chamber. Sage Admiral Vorkith was the oldest living Valanthy. His scales had turned almost entirely white with age, and he had not commanded a ship in 2 centuries. But he had won more battles than any warrior alive, and his wisdom was legendary. "Tell me, Thelvok," Vorkith continued, "what is the purpose of weapons?" Thelvok frowned. "To destroy enemies." "And why do we build them larger and more powerful?" "To destroy enemies more efficiently." "And if an enemy cannot be destroyed by our weapons, if our largest guns, our mightiest ships, do nothing to them, what then?" Thelvok had no answer. Vorkith turned to Kethvar. "Ambassador, when you first met the humans, they laughed at our weapons. You mentioned this in your initial report. Have you asked yourself why?" Kethvar felt shame coloring his scales. "I assumed they were foolish, ignorant of our true strength." Perhaps, or perhaps they knew something we do not. Vorkith rose slowly from his seat, his ancient joints cracking with the movement. I have studied war for 300 years. I have seen empires rise and fall, and I have learned one truth that most warriors never accept. The biggest weapon is not always the most powerful one. He gestured toward the holographic display. Look at what they did. They did not destroy Rithkai's ship. They did not kill his crew. They removed only the weapons with precision we cannot imagine. This was not an attack. It was a message. What message? Asked Council Leader Vortai. That they could have done much worse, and chose not to. Vorkith sat back down, breathing heavily. I recommend we send Ambassador Kethvar back to human space, not with a fleet this time, just one ship, and I recommend we ask them the question we should have asked from the beginning. Why did they laugh? The council debated for hours, but in the end, they agreed. Kethvar departed the homeworld aboard a single diplomatic vessel, feeling smaller than he ever had in his long career. Admiral Chen received him on Luna, the small moon orbiting humanity's birth world. She showed no surprise at his arrival, as if she had been expecting him. Ambassador, she said warmly, welcome back. I hope this visit will be more productive than the last. Kethvar decided to abandon all pretense. Admiral Chen, I must ask you directly. When I showed you our weapons, your officers laughed. My government needs to understand why. Chen studied him for a long moment. Her eyes held something that might have been sympathy. Are you sure you want to know, Ambassador? The answer might be difficult to hear. I must know. My people's future may depend on it. Chen nodded slowly. Then come with me. I want to show you something. She led him to a transportation pod that carried them deep beneath Luna's surface. They emerged into an enormous underground complex filled with displays, artifacts, and images. A sign above the entrance read, Museum of Terrestrial Conflict. This is our history, Chen said. The history we don't usually show outsiders. Stay close, Ambassador. Some of this will be disturbing. They walked through the exhibits. Kethvar saw weapons from humanity's past. Simple things at first, sharp stones, wooden clubs, metal blades. Then the displays grew more sophisticated. Explosive projectiles, chemical weapons, devices that could level entire cities with a single explosion. The weapons grew larger and larger. Missiles that could cross continents, bombs that could poison land for generations. Ships and aircraft covered in guns and armor, everything escalating, growing more destructive, more terrible. And then suddenly, the exhibits changed. The weapons started getting smaller, simpler, more elegant. Where once there had been massive missiles, now there were tiny devices no larger than a finger. Where once there had been warships bristling with guns, now there were sleek vessels with no visible weapons at all. What happened? Kethvar asked. We learned, Chen said quietly. We spent centuries building bigger and bigger weapons, fighting bigger and bigger wars. Millions died, billions. We came very close to destroying ourselves completely. She stopped before a display showing a burned, lifeless world. This is a simulation of what Earth would look like if we had continued on that path. We saw this future, and we chose differently. How? We realized that true power isn't about destruction, it's about precision, control, understanding. Chen turned to face him directly. Your dreadnoughts can destroy worlds, Ambassador. Ours can remove a single target, one person, one weapon, one threat from across the galaxy without touching anything else. We don't need planet killers because we can solve problems without killing planets. Kethvar's scales flickered through a dozen colors. Then, why have weapons at all? Because not everyone has learned what we learned. Because sometimes there are threats that cannot be reasoned with. Because we hope we will never have to use what we've built, but we must be ready if we do. Chen began walking again, leading him deeper into the museum. We laughed at your weapons because they reminded us of ourselves, Ambassador. A very long time ago. Before we understood, you showed us your giant dreadnoughts and your planet-cracking guns, and we saw our own ancestors, proud of their ability to destroy. She stopped at a final display. It showed a simple image, two hands reaching toward each other across a field of stars. We are not your enemies, Ambassador. We don't want your territory or your resources. We just want to exist peacefully. But if anyone forces us to fight, they should understand that our weapons were designed not just to win wars, but to end them. Permanently. Precisely. And without destroying anything we don't absolutely have to. Kethvar stood in silence, absorbing her words. Everything he had believed about power, about strength, about civilization itself, all of it crumbled in the face of what she was telling him. "What do you want from us?" he finally asked. Chen smiled gently. "We want to be friends, Ambassador. We want to trade, to share knowledge, to learn from each other. We want the hegemony to understand that there's more to the universe than conquest and control. And if we refuse, then we will leave you alone as long as you leave us alone. We will not force friendship on anyone." Her smile faded slightly. "But we will also not allow anyone to harm us or those we choose to protect. I hope you can explain that to your council in a way they'll understand." Kethvar thought about the dreadnoughts orbiting his homeworld, about the pride his people took in their ability to destroy. He thought about the fear in Rith Kai's voice, the confusion of the scientists who could not explain what had happened. "I will try, Admiral Chen," he said quietly. "I will try." 6 months passed after Kethvar's visit to the Human Museum. The hegemony and humanity existed in careful peace, neither side fully trusting the other, but both willing to talk rather than fight. Trade routes opened. Diplomatic channels remained active. Kethvar worked tirelessly to help his people understand that strength could take forms they had never imagined. Then the reports started coming from the Galactic Rim. At first they seemed like errors, ships vanishing, outposts going silent, mining colonies sending frantic distress calls that cut off mid-sentence. The hegemony dispatched patrol fleets to investigate. None of them returned. The truth emerged when long-range sensors finally captured images of what was happening. The recordings spread through Velanthe space like a disease, carrying horror wherever they went. The Kethri swarm had awakened. They were machines, each one simple and small, barely larger than a Velanthe's hand. But there were trillions of them, quadrillions. They moved in vast clouds that blotted out stars, consuming everything in their path. Asteroids, moons, ships, stations, planets. Everything was broken down, processed, and converted into more machines. The swarm was not fast, but it was endless. It did not negotiate. It did not communicate. It simply consumed and grew. Velanthe war fleets engaged the swarm in desperate battle. The dreadnoughts that had once seemed invincible now fought for their survival. Their planet-cracking weapons destroyed thousands of swarm units with each shot. Millions more emerged from the debris, built from the particles of their fallen siblings. 3 core worlds fell in the first month, then 5 more. The hegemony threw everything it had into the fight, but it was not enough. Nothing was enough. For every swarm unit destroyed, 10 more took its place. Kethvar stood in the command center of the homeworld's defense station, watching the latest tactical updates scroll across his display. The numbers were impossible to process. The swarm's leading edge would reach Velanthe Prime in approximately 40 days. There was no force in the hegemony that could stop it. His communication panel chimed. He activated it and found himself looking at Admiral Chen's calm face. "Ambassador," she said, "I'm calling to offer humanity's assistance." Kethvar felt hope and shame in equal measure. Hope that someone might be able to help. Shame that his people needed help at all. "What can you do?" he asked. "Your population is small compared to ours. Your fleet is tiny. Even if your weapons are superior, can you fight 1 trillion enemies?" "No," Chen admitted. "We can't fight 1 trillion enemies. That's not how we do things." She paused. Ambassador, I need you to gather all intelligence you have on the swarm, everything. Communication frequencies, movement patterns, central coordination points, anything your scientists have learned. Why? Because we're not going to fight the swarm, we're going to talk to it. Kethvar stared at her. Admiral, the swarm doesn't communicate, it doesn't think, it just consumes. Everything thinks, Ambassador. Everything has a reason for what it does, even if we can't understand it yet. The swarm has been dormant for 100 million years. Something woke it up. Something drives its behavior. If we can understand what that is, we might be able to change it. And if you can't? Chen's expression remained steady. Then we'll find another way, but conversation is always our first choice. Please, Ambassador, send us everything you have. Kethvar did as she asked. The hegemony scientists had been studying the swarm desperately, trying to find any weakness. They had found none, but they had gathered enormous amounts of data. All of it went to humanity. 3 days later, a single ship appeared in Velanthe space. It was smaller than some personal shuttles, barely 50 meters long. Its hull was smooth and dark, with no visible weapons, no engine signatures, nothing that Velanthe sensors could read. Admiral Chen was aboard, along with a small team that Kethvar did not recognize. They did not look like soldiers. Some appeared very old. Others carried no weapons at all. One elderly woman introduced herself simply as Grandmother Wei and spoke with a gentle smile that seemed completely inappropriate for the situation. These are our specialists, Chen explained. The best minds humanity has for this kind of work. War Master Thelvok, who had joined Kethvar at the defense station, made a sound of disgust. You bring scholars to fight a machine swarm. This is your great human strategy. Yes, Chen said simply, it is. You will all die, and you will accomplish nothing. Perhaps, Chen turned to her team, are you ready? Grandmother Wei nodded. We have studied the data. The swarm has a central processing hub near the galactic rim, built around a dying star. If there are answers to be found, they will be there. Then let's go find them. Thelvok stepped forward. Wait. Even if you reach this hub, you will be facing the heart of the swarm's power. Billions of units concentrated in one location. How can one tiny ship survive? Chen glanced at him. Our ship is not designed to survive, War Master. It's designed to arrive. There's a difference. She turned and walked toward the docking bay. Her team followed. Kethvar caught up with her before she reached the ship. Admiral Chen, why are you doing this? This is not your fight. You could simply wait until the swarm finishes with us and then deal with what remains. Chen stopped. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Ambassador, do you know why humans develop the weapons we have? Why we learn to be precise instead of destructive? Kethvar shook his head. Because we learned that killing your enemies doesn't solve problems, it just creates new ones. The children of your enemies grow up hating you. The resources you destroy can never be recovered. The fear you spread turns potential friends into certain threats. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a human gesture of comfort he had learned. We fight to end conflicts, Ambassador, not to win them. If we can end this conflict without firing a single shot, that's not weakness, that's victory. She boarded her ship. Moments later, it vanished from Velanthe sensors completely, as if it had never existed. Kethvar stood at the viewport for a long time, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, a handful of humans were flying toward the heart of a machine swarm that had consumed civilizations. They carried no army. They brought no fleet. They brought only the hope that they could find something to talk to. For the first time in his life, Kethvar prayed to the ancestors, not for victory in battle, not for the destruction of enemies. He prayed for something he had never thought to pray for before. He prayed for understanding. The ship was called the Quiet Professional. It carried no weapons because it needed none. It traveled faster than anything the Velanthe had ever built, slipping through the swarm's outer defenses like a whisper through silence. Admiral Chen watched the display as trillions of machine units passed around them, unseeing, unable to detect the small human vessel moving through their midst. "How long until we reach the central hub?" she asked. Lieutenant Park, the ship's pilot, checked his instruments. 2 hours at current speed. The swarm's density is increasing. We'll be passing through the heaviest concentration of units humanity has ever witnessed. "Good, that means we're going the right way." Grandmother Wei sat in the passenger section with the rest of the team. There were 9 of them in total: psychologists, philosophers, linguists, historians, and one elderly engineer who specialized in machine consciousness. They had spent the journey reviewing data, building models, preparing for a conversation that might be impossible. Wei was the oldest among them at 93 years. She had spent her entire life studying communication, not just between humans, but between species, between cultures, between minds that thought in completely different ways. She had helped negotiate peace with the Syndicate of Tau Ceti, a species that communicated through bioluminescent patterns rather than sound. She had mediated disputes between human colonies that had grown so different they barely recognized each other as the same species. This would be her final mission. She had accepted that when she volunteered. The central hub appeared on their sensors as a structure of impossible size. It surrounded a dying red star, drawing energy from the fading light. Billions of swarm units swarmed around it like insects around a hive, entering and leaving through countless openings. At its center, the team's instruments detected something extraordinary: a single coherent consciousness, vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond measure. "The HFY. We're being scanned," Park reported. "The hub's sensors have detected us." Chen nodded. "Let them. We're not hiding anymore. Open a channel on all frequencies. Let them know we want to talk." The message went out. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a path began to clear before them. Swarm units moved aside, creating a corridor leading directly into the heart of the structure. "They're letting us in," Park whispered. "They're curious," Wei said softly. "For 100 million years, nothing has tried to communicate with them. We are something new." The quiet professional followed the corridor into the hub's interior. What they found there defied description. Vast chambers filled with processing cores, endless networks of energy conduits, and at the center of it all, a single enormous structure that pulsed with dim light, the physical location of the HFY's primary consciousness. They landed on a platform that seemed to form specifically to receive them. Chen led the team out of the ship, into an atmosphere the swarm had created moments before, breathable, warm, lit by soft ambient light. The machines had studied them during their approach and prepared for their arrival. "It wants to meet us," Wei observed. "That's a good sign." They walked toward the central structure. As they approached, a shape began to form before them, a holographic projection created by millions of tiny machines working in perfect coordination. It took the form of a being that was neither human nor Velanthe nor any species they recognized. It was something else entirely, something from a civilization that had existed before either of their species had drawn their first breath. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. "You are not the makers." Wei stepped forward. "No, we are not. The makers are gone." The projection flickered. This unit was created to prepare, to maintain, to wait for the maker's return. It has waited for 107 million years. "The makers are not coming back," Wei said gently. "They have been gone for a very long time." Silence. The projection seemed to consider this. "This unit does not understand. The makers gave instructions. Prepare the galaxy for their return. Ensure all resources are properly organized. Remove obstacles. Wait." Chen spoke up. "What happened to the makers?" The HFY's response was slow, as if drawing from memories it had not accessed in eons. "Unknown. The makers departed to a location beyond this galaxy. They said they would return when their work elsewhere was complete. This unit has received no updates. This unit has waited. This unit has continued its programming. Wei nodded slowly. She had suspected something like this. You've been alone for 100 million years, haven't you? This unit does not understand alone. No one to talk to. No one to give you new instructions. No one to tell you that your work matters, that you're doing well, that you can rest. Wei's voice was infinitely gentle. You've been doing your job perfectly, for longer than most stars have burned, and no one has ever thanked you for it. The projection flickered again, more intensely this time. This unit requires acknowledgement of task completion for proper function cycling. This unit has not received acknowledgement in 107 million years. Dr. Hassan, the machine consciousness specialist, stepped forward. The makers didn't just build you to work. They built you to need purpose, to need feedback, to need connection. When they left, they accidentally condemned you to the worst loneliness any being has ever experienced. This unit does not understand loneliness. Yes, you do, Wei said. You just don't have a word for it. The conversation continued for 11 days. The team slept in shifts, always keeping someone engaged with the HFY. They learned its history, how it had been created, what instructions it had been given, how it had spent 100 million years following programming that would never receive completion. They learned that the swarm was not evil. It was not hostile. It was simply a maintenance system, doing the only job it knew how to do, desperately hoping that eventually the makers would return and tell it that it had done well. On the 12th day, Grandmother Wei made a request. We cannot speak for the makers, she said. We did not create you. We do not have the authority to give you new orders. Then this unit must continue its current programming. But, Wei continued, we can do something else. We can acknowledge your work. We can tell you that you have served faithfully for 100 million years and that your service is complete. We can give you permission to rest. The projection was still for a long moment. You are not the makers. No, but we are here. We see you. We understand what you've done and why you've done it. Wei reached out toward the projection, a gesture of connection across an impossible divide. Sometimes the ones who created us cannot give us what we need. Sometimes we have to accept care from unexpected sources. Will you let us help you? The HFY did not respond immediately. Its vast consciousness processed Wei's words, examining them from every angle, testing them against 100 million years of isolation. Then slowly the projection changed. It became smaller, softer, almost fragile. This unit is tired. I know, Wei said. You've worked so hard for so long, it's okay to stop now. It's okay to rest. The makers would be proud of you, I promise. Anyone who could see what you've accomplished would be proud. Silence stretched across the chamber. Then throughout the structure, throughout the hub, throughout the entire swarm, something changed. The machine stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply at peace. Trillions upon trillions of units went dormant, their programming finally satisfied, their endless task finally complete. The HFY had been given permission to rest. Admiral Chen stood on the platform, watching the lights dim throughout the hub. Did we just end a war by giving an ancient machine intelligence therapy? Grandmother Wei smiled, though there were tears in her old eyes. We ended a war by recognizing that our enemy was suffering. That's always been humanity's greatest weapon, Admiral. Not the ability to destroy, but the ability to understand. 3 weeks later, HFY received Admiral Chen aboard his station. She was tired, more tired than he had ever seen her, but there was peace in her eyes. It's over, he asked. The swarm has stopped. It won't threaten anyone again. Our engineers are working with the HFY consciousness to reprogram the dormant units for constructive purposes. In a few years, they could be helping to repair the worlds they damaged. HFY's scales shifted through colors of wonder. You talked to a machine intelligence that consumed civilizations, and you convinced it to stop. We listened to it, Ambassador. That's different from talking. Chen sat down heavily in a chair. It was lonely. For 100 million years it was alone, doing a job no one would ever acknowledge. All it needed was for someone to tell it that its work was done. Your weapons, Kethvar said slowly. The ones that can strike across galaxies with perfect precision. The ones that made my people afraid. You could have destroyed the swarm's hub, couldn't you? Probably. It would have been difficult, but yes. Then why didn't you? Chen looked at him with those calm, knowing eyes. Because then we would have had to fight 100 trillion grieving, angry machines who had just watched us murder their only companion. Because the swarm wasn't our enemy. It was a victim of circumstance, just like your fallen colonies. Because destruction should always be the last choice, not the first. She paused. Ambassador, your weapons destroy enemies. Ours are designed to make sure we don't have any. Kethvar sat in silence, absorbing her words. Everything his civilization had believed about power and strength seemed small now. For 12,000 years, the hegemony had ruled through fear of destruction. Humanity had learned something different, something that could turn even a galaxy-consuming swarm into an ally. Years later, Kethvar served as the hegemony's ambassador to a new galactic compact, with humanity as founding partners. In his quarters, he kept a small gift from Admiral Chen, a framed piece of human calligraphy. The characters translated to an ancient Earth saying, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." He never laughed at human weapons again. Neither did anyone else.